Hi, welcome to CAUS, Diasporic Conversations on Black Trans Masculinities. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to introduce two wonderful panelists, Lucah Rosenberg-Lee and Melz, who are here with us today. I feel really, I'm kind of excited, and I'm looking forward to the discussions because it's very rare that there is a panel that's all Black, that's one thing, then all Black, trans, masculine people, and of varying genders, binary, non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. So we're going to get really stuck into an interesting conversation. So I'm going to introduce myself. As I said, my name is Campbell X, and I wrote and directed the award-winning, it's a bit weird introducing myself and saying what I've done, but I'm going to do it anyway. The queer urban romantic comedy feature film Stud Life. It was voted by The Guardian as one of the top 10 Black British feature films made over the last 40 years in the UK. It was also in Vogue magazine as one of the best films to watch in 2020 under lockdown. And it was also selected by the British Film Institute as one of the top 8 queer films to view while we were all on lockdown. I am the co-founder with Nilu Booman of Wahala Film Fund, which is a completion film fund for queer, trans, intersex, people of color in Europe and the global South. And both Kaiser Rose and I co-created and co-curated Cutie Pop Family, which is a performance film and clubbing event for Cutie Pop people, queer, trans, intersex, people of color, and our allies. And for those who are visually impaired or blind, I am I'm a Black person with a tufty beard and glasses, and I've got a kind of blue denim-y kind of flat cap, and I've got a grey jacket and a white shirt, short collar. And in the background, there's a picture of a wonderful Krishna Ishtar, who is in the film Desire. So next is Melz, who is nodding right now and smiling. Melz is the founder of the Free Black University and waving, for those who can see. And please, please, please find the Free Black University because it's a radical project. They're an activist that works in a number of spaces such as Black Lives Matter UK, decolonizing education and trans visibility. So the Free Black University is about decolonizing education and for free. They are multifaceted artist and academic, and their work explores the radical Black imagination and building transformative worlds. Their passion is research, and they will soon be taking up a PhD position at the University of Cambridge, exploring new visions for a collective world. Their film is Black Trans Masculinity, and it's directed by Will Stanley. And Melz how would you describe your hair?
I've got short locks
and shaved round,
shaved at the sides. Just wearing a
black
t-shirt,
a black t-shirt
with a chain.
Thank you, Melz. And Lucah Rosenberg-Lee is a Toronto-based independent filmmaker, speaker, and entrepreneur. Lucah was adopted from the Dominican Republic into a Toronto family, where he developed his love of activism through film and his passion to tell stories that will move people. I'm certainly moved by your film, Lucah. Last year, Lucah spoke to over 20,000 students across Canada about his personal experience being a trans man in today's society and the importance of LGBTQ representation, kindness, and acceptance. Currently, Lucah is the chief brand consultant at the creative agency Natural Element, a company that works to create compelling pieces of digital content in today's modern marketing landscape. Thank you, Lucah, for being here. Lucah, like myself, is wearing glasses and a lilac t-shirt and is sitting in an armchair.
Yes.
And is smiling. And also has a wonderful beard and mustache, very tailored, very coiffed.
Thank you.
And yeah, everybody's like going like chef's kiss to your bread, Lucah. We're now going to look at the films. Please try and look at them full screen, and then we'll be back for the discussion. And our discussion is Diasporic, because Lucah's in Toronto, and we're in the UK. And it's also very rare that we get to have these kind of transnational discussions as well. So let's see the films. Hi, welcome back. And I'm just kind of like, wow. Every time I see those films, I feel a lot, actually, every time. And so I just wanted to take a little moment, especially that hug, Lucah, at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna like start asking some questions. All the people out there, you can, put questions to us as well, so that we have some questions to the panelists. So welcome back, everybody, and welcome back, Lucah and Melz. So Lucah, my first question to you is, your whole film's about passing and being stealth. And, when one thinks of transitioning, a lot of times the issue of passing comes up a lot. You're supposed to get privileges as a trans man, and as a Black trans man, this becomes quite complicated and complex. So I really wanted to find out a little bit about this vexing thing about passing and maybe some of the pitfalls vis-a-vis privilege, or because so if you can sort of explore that with me a little bit.
Absolutely, and thanks for everything that you said too. So I mean, the concept kind of I guess I should start by saying my experience of passing has changed over time, over the last number of years. But it was, and I guess still is, a fundamental part of my experience and also the work that I do. When I first started transition, I was very much, it was about passing for me. It was about that. I was, this was very early on in a lot of these conversations, now 10 years ago when I started my transition. And my main goal was just, I want to pass. I don't want to think about this ever again. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want people to know. I just kind of want to become invisible and assimilate myself into society. So I spent the first 5 years of my transition pursuing that actively and learning how to be, sometimes when I tell people I'm trans, they're very surprised because they still don't think that trans people look all these different ways. And so sometimes I think that what they don't realize is that a lot of our gendered identities are presentative, right? They are learned through hanging out, and as we know, right, a lot of who I am today was learned in that early period of those 5 years where I wasn't telling anybody. I was working jobs where my colleagues didn't know, and even the guy that I made the film with, we were friends for 2 years before I told him that I was trans. So I spent a lot of my experience very stealth. The reason why I shifted to now doing things like this, even making a movie about it, speaking about it on a regular basis, I've even recently signed out for a fitness class, and I told the trainer in the first session, hey, I'm trans, and this is kind of what I need to feel comfortable. It's become very important for me because passing did have all these pitfalls. Passing became incredibly complex for me. And I think some of the reasons is because you're hearing all of these things and you're being exposed to all of these other parts of society that at least I wasn't fully aware of. I mean, I knew sexism existed, I knew transphobia existed, I knew racism existed, but it wasn't until I was passing as just a regular guy that I realized how deep that really went, because now people were saying stuff to me that they may have never said to me before. Now I'm in situations that I may have never been in before. And similar to Melz, to what you talked about in your film, even about the touching. you know, once I was passing a lot, it's like people are grabbing your nipples, they're touching you in different ways as a man that maybe was very different than when you were female. And so passing's kind of expanded for me in many ways, and I also recognize that not everyone's goal is to pass, and that we shouldn't just see validity of trans people as passing or not passing. There's such a huge spectrum there. And the last thing I'll add about that is that I think passing goes beyond transition. One thing that I'm hoping that the film does is to remind people that there's areas where we all pass, and that we're not exposing ourselves, whether it's a mental health thing or whether it's, you know, an invisible disability, or, you know, I even think about my mom who grew up as like a Jewish woman post-Holocaust, and passing to her was like passing as not Jewish, passing as Christian. So, you know, I wanted to kind of explore all of those things in this film.
That's great. And it's great that you mentioned that thing about us all passing. And as we know, if people have read the 1920s Harlem Renaissance book, Passing by Nella Larson, there was also a kind of way in which Black people passed,
yes,
in order to have economic advantages while bringing them back to the Black community. So yeah, it's very complex. I wanted to pass over to Melz to ask you about, you know, we live, and this relates to passing in a way, because a lot about passing has to do with conforming to binary ideas of gender. And Melz, you identify more as non-binary, and I kind of wanted to explore with you how do you find it embracing your masculinity within a binary culture defining as non-binary, and what what are the challenges for you within that? Because Western culture is very binary, and I don't know if you can bring in aspects of that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Campbell. And just to also say, those two other films were beautiful, like powerful. I really resonated with a lot that was said in both of them. In terms of being outside of the binary, it's hard because like we live in a world where people only see like black and white in it. They only see a binary, and so you're like you live in a world where you're never really in public seen for your gender. So there's no way that you can pass in it because people don't understand like what non-binary is for the most part when you're like just in quote unquote like general society. And so it's an interesting space because it's like dependent on who's the receiver of me, of my being, however I present myself, they then decide which way they're going to categorize me. And so over the past year and a half since I've like been like medically like transitioning and stuff, like still up to this day, it's like I don't know what's going to happen. Like I don't know which way you're going to go today, but I have to make it none of my business. Like, and just try and compartmentalize as much as possible, like whatever society has to say about me and my gender. But of course at the same time stay safe. And it kind of puts you in a place where like in the film I talk about like my relationship to testosterone and like how long I want to be on testosterone, how I want my physical body to look. It puts you in a place where like in order to feel like accepted by society, I have to go like left or right in it. Yeah, I have to go all the way on testosterone until like I look like a cis passing man, and then deal with life as a cis passing man. But that's not my truth. But my truth isn't that I'm a woman either. And so it's just this continuous like complex untangling of society. I was gonna say of self, but more so of society, because I know who I am. I know what makes me feel comfortable. I know my center, but then being in a world that has no concept of it.
Yeah, it is very tricky because I you know it'd be interesting the experiences of cis people as well. Do they feel their gender? Do you know what I mean? It's like we have these debates, like if we're in transness, as if it's unique to transness, but there might be a way in which we can possibly embrace gender and speak about, you know, people's passing in a way. You know, there's some cis people who probably feel they're passing as more masculine than they really feel, you know, talking about subjects they don't really want to talk about, but because you know, you're accepted into a group if you follow, you know, certain things, like you were saying, suddenly men started to talk to you, cis men, about things, and you're like, whoa, you know, I'm not really comfortable with this. But how do you say that without, and also not passing? You know
Yes.
what I mean?
If I can jump in on that real quick, that was a big experience that I had at one of the first jobs that I had as male, was navigating all of that stuff. Navigating, you know, sometimes I'd be standing with two guys, another guy would come up and say a bunch of stuff, maybe about women or about sex or about something. One guy would agree and laugh, and then after, you know, the man who spoke walked away, I'd find myself asking, did you actually find that funny, to the other guy? Because, like, I wasn't sure how to respond. I wasn't confident enough in my masculinity to stand up for it. So I'd say, you laugh, but did you find it funny? And I would be surprised at how many men would say, no, that wasn't funny at all, but what are you going to do? And it's just kind of this way of, that I found in a lot of the masculine world, like, no one really wants to say anything. Or at least that's how it was like 5 years ago. I think it's slowly changing, but it just reminded me of that when you said that.
I think I think these experiences, people need to out themselves more, and I think also cis people need to out themselves more. It shouldn't just be centered, like, you know, when people talk about like queer investigations into why are people queer. Well, why don't they try to find out why are people straight? You know, why is that never investigated? I just think it's how we center the conversation. I was going to ask you about, you know, but in your film, Sasha in particular talks about, you know, coming to terms with being trans after not. And I kind of wanted to talk about Black Boy Joy with you, Lucah, and I suppose what they now call gender euphoria. How did you come to love, you know, you said something about loving, you know, loving the way you look. And so how did you come to love your trans self, your Black trans self, through your whole journeys of identity?
You know, I think it's taken a lot of time, and I still have moments where I struggle with it. But I think, one, through having conversations like this, watching other people's work, and just seeing yourself reflected, you know, in Desire is great, that pan down of the body and seeing those scars. It's like, I don't get to see that. So seeing that really helps. Having other trans people in my life also really helps. And then doing personal work, and I think the personal work probably started when I was a kid too, before I even knew that I was going to transition, but just ongoing self-love work through journaling and through, you know, just trying to answer questions, maybe the bigger questions that you have about life, and unlearning a lot of the narrative that might have gone on around you in society. So a big one for me is, you know, for instance, I run a business now. I really enjoy what I do in the brand world and stuff, and also making movies. But realizing that for a long time, I had this idea that because I was Black and trans, I couldn't do those things. You know, that I wasn't going to be successful, that I wasn't going to live my dreams, that I would maybe even never be happy, or that, you know, no one's going to love you, or all those things that play out on a day-to-day. And I think so part of the work in terms of getting to a place where you love yourself more is recognizing that a lot of that narrative was imposed on you and isn't true, and that we have to do the mental work to say, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to, you know, find a way to to enjoy myself despite what other people might be saying about my body. And I think Melz kind of touched on that in their film, you know, in a sense, saying like, why is it always centered around not being happy? And even when I was speaking to those, you know, those students across Canada, a lot of the time they would ask me in the Q&A, like, what's the hardest part of transition? How do you still love yourself? Like, are you ever sad? Is it ever painful? Like, that must be really tough. And it's like, yeah, all those things are true. But I think it is, unfortunately, up to us right now to change that up and say, yes, all those things might be true, but I also enjoy my job, and I have an amazing partner, and, you know, I've just entered my 30s, and I would say it's just now starting to feel like, okay, after 10 years of transition, I'm like, okay, I'm finally starting to accept the fact that, all right, this isn't so bad, you know?
You're good,
Yes,
sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly, getting better.
Which brings me onto the topic of healing, Melz, and the kind of, somebody mentioned it in your film, Lucah, passing, how Black um, cultures and indigenous cultures saw trans people and gender fluid people, non-binary people as sacred. And Melz, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, how can we as Black trans masc or, non-binary people reclaim that sacredness, and talk about it quite openly. Because I think in Western culture, there's a kind of a way in which it's miffed at, scorned at in some ways, spirituality and sacredness. So I'd like to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, no, most def. I thought that was such a beautiful part in that film where the person was talking about trans people as shamans, as healers, and it's so important to recognize that we come from that lineage. Like we are sacred as people. Like we just holding the energies of like masculinity and femininity, if we still tap into that, is such a beautiful space to work from. And in our cultures prior to colonization, prior to the kind of the the way that masculinity has been like centered in such a toxic way within like Western culture, and how that's kind of proliferated into other cultures and into the rest of the world. Like prior to all of the landscape as the world is today, the Eurocentric westernized world, in our cultures, genderqueer people, trans people, and so on, were sacred people. We were people that people believed were like the closest to God, that were healers, and like I practice that now in my daily life, even before I realized that relationship between trans people and spirituality. But seeing the nature of like my spirituality and my intuitive gifts and so on, and connecting with pre-colonial spiritualities, and like reclaiming myself as not as trans not being something new, but as trans being something like deeply historical.
Thank you. I mean, that's quite important. I'm going to ask one last question because I know we have a limited time, and there are people who are in the audience have wanted to ask questions of us as well. And, we've both films have, Passing, Desire, and, your film about Black trans masculinity males have spoken somehow about, that balance between the masculine and the feminine, the body being looked at, not looked at. And, and often we don't hear much about Black trans men speaking from a feminist perspective. And I wanted to know how we can glow up our feminist game in supporting, our trans sisters, how we can enter those conversations in a coherent way, because sometimes there's a denial of the femininity and the killing of it in order to survive as a Black trans man. And I just wanted to know how we can be more feminist.
Yeah. I guess I'll say something short on that. I guess personally, one part for me was learning how to, I guess, embrace more feminine energy back into my life. Because for so long, as you said, it was cut off, not just from my past self, but also, I was single for a long time, and I work in a very male-dominated space, and so I found myself spending years almost at a time with very little women in my life, or female-identified people, and I think that coming back to that and at least recognizing it and then trying to make active change towards that has been helpful for me. But I also think through conversations like this and reminding our cisgendered male people in our life that they shouldn't be afraid of their femininity either, and that they, just helping them change some of their perspectives around their own gender, the way we interact as gendered people, and just starting to see some of the ways that our society, especially as a man, starts to cut you off from women and that type of stuff. Like, one quick example of that is, so for instance, my girlfriend, she reads a lot of books written by women. I read a lot of business books and stuff like that. I realize that I don't, like, very few books that I read are written by women. And that, again, it's just in those small things that we can start saying, hey, like, I want to recognize where my own sexism lies and where we can all be better at figuring out ways to create space for everyone within ourselves and also outside of ourselves too.
Wonderful. Yeah, and again, the journey to self, and how within reclaiming that we can open up ourselves to bigger experiences in a way too,
Yes.
beyond our identities. Melz, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, no, I definitely like think that those things are like really, really important. And I guess I could just come from a different position on it all, and just like, and that's, I guess that's why, like, I've never lost touch with my feminine energy. My feminine energy is probably my most dominant energy, just as like a soul and who I am. And black feminist thought, black feminist theory, that's what, like I said in my film, that's where I found my first home, and that remains the same. And I read mostly like books by black women and so on. And so, like, being able to embody this non-binary identity, like, and hold that feminine so close to my center, even though the exterior is like very masculine, this is how I feel comfortable in my body. It's why so many people just don't understand me in it. And so that's why I've always got to kind of like navigate and like choose people in my life who are willing to get to understand like both the feminine and the masculine aspects of me, and how those polarities like create the whole.
Yes. And I think I sometimes wonder if people don't understand because we're afraid to have those conversations, because we're afraid of what the answers might be, and then we have to look at our own selves. Do you know what I mean? Because the cultures that we come from, the indigenous cultures, were about the balance between feminine and masculine energy anyway. But in our journey through the centuries in Western culture, there's been a commodification of gender. So there'll be like products, men's, perfume, men's this, and then women's that. If you notice that birthday cards now are gendered in color, they're color coordinated when you go into a shop. That didn't used to happen so much before. So, but it's a lot of things about capitalism and marketing as well. And we've been lured into think that it's culture and it's an innate form of our behavior.
Definitely. And just one other thing to add on that as well,
Yeah.
like both, all like, in terms of like cisgendered people as well, recognizing that they hold masculine and feminine energies is like super important. And like you can be a cisgendered woman who holds like majority masculine energy, and like just recognizing that we're all like, gender is just something that we create in it, and that what we can all just be whoever we want to be. Like it's dope.
It is, and and that's the wonderful thing about being queer. You can make yourself be who you really are, as opposed to who is it being imposed on us.
Yes.
There's some questions from the audience, so I'm going to go through them. Keep your questions coming. If you don't ask, we can't answer. Okay. So Pat Clinton has a question. Is there a trans masc narrative that doesn't intersect with butch femininity, such as somebody transmasculine who never identified as butch? Is there space for that? Is there language for that? Well, I personally know a lot of people who actually identified as high femme, and yes I and became trans men, and went through a journey of that, and quite masculine, and then became more non-binary. So it's interesting, people's journeys anyway. I want to hear what.
I mean, I never identified as butch, but I think other people might have identified me that way. But I found that one of the reasons that I transitioned was because I felt like there wasn't a lot of identities that I felt comfortable with. And when I first started to hang out in more queer spaces, I would meet women who were masculine presenting, and I would be like, oh, great, this is somebody who's like me, and we have the same, finally I'm connecting. But then I would ask them how they felt about their gender, and they'd be like, "No, I'm female. Like, I'm butch though. I'm not. I don't feel like a man. I don't want to be a man. I don't any of those things. I have masculine energy maybe, but I have no desire to transition." And that was something that reminded me, oh wow, I must be different somehow. And so yeah, that we don't always follow these. Like, sometimes people think that, you know, a trans woman might be like, oh, they just were so gay or something, they want to be then they were like, I might as, but we know that it doesn't really go like that, because a lot of trans women were never gay. They were always, you know, so it's very interesting.
Yeah. And there's some trans women who are butch lesbians. So
there we go. Exactly.
So I think humans are so beautiful. What do you think, Melz? Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, similarly, I never identified as butch or as a stud or anything. Like a masculine presenting woman. And I think, and like similarly, like the reason that I transitioned is because I didn't identify as that, and like it just didn't make no sense to me. Like on a personal level, I was just very adamant, like, because if I had to start engaging with the idea of gender, because I was just kind of like living it as like, okay, there's just this thing that's happening in my life, reading however you want. But if I had to like double down into something, I knew I couldn't double down into something that was still woman. And so that's where the space for transition came from me.
Thank you. And there's a question from Jack Lopez. I was struck by the idea of the struggle of losing yourself due to expectations of others, mentioned in passing. I'm interested to know what you'll think about that in your own experiences, being at different stages and in different social worlds.
Well, I'll give one quick example of that. You know, for instance, my birth name, for a long time I was like, no one say it, let's get rid of all the photos in the house. It would be very challenging for me to, even when people would talk about it or I'd hear it randomly. So I think there was almost a purposeful losing of myself at one point in my transition, because I was so scarred from kind of how I had felt before. But I think then there's a finding yourself too. And over the years, now it is more acceptable for me to, like, I don't just show people photos, but, you know, I'm more comfortable with it through lots of healing and through triggering in my own ways, you know, just to, because it's not that fun to cut yourself off from your past that much, even if you needed to do it at the time. And I think that it just can take a long time, and maybe that happens to everyone in different ways. You know, maybe it's not just a trans experience thing, but I would say that it's important not to lose yourself in it completely.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very common experience, and thank you so much for sharing that and, you know, your way through it. I think it's really important to hear the journeys, like, you know, Jack was asking the different stages. And Mel's, like, because you speak about that in your film as well.
Yeah, I speak about it a bit in the film, and there's an article that I wrote that speaks about it as well. And I think a lot about like the genealogies of like trans life, and so like the the time scales that we as trans people like live on, and this idea that we have to cut at one point and then start a new life, and how much that like just erases of us as like beings, how much. And it's just like I didn't wake up one day, like put on testosterone and like heal from all of like the life of black womanhood that I lived like prior to that first day of tea. And I think that's what the world wants us to be, so that they can understand us and like fit us into whatever box they want to fit us into. And so like throughout my whole transition, it's been super important for me to bring along all aspects of myself, all, and like try and care for that inner child as well, like understand that inner child, recognize that inner child who was like living as a dark-skinned black woman or a dark-skinned like little black girl, and like loving her like same way that I love myself right now, innit? And like I've always been uncomfortable with the idea of like a dead name in it, because I was just like, nobody died. Like I haven't died. Like I'm just growing up. Like this is part of my genealogy. Like my transition is just like the progression of my life. This is just me like growing up. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much. And Phil Opoku Giamak, hi, Lady Phil. Royalties in the house.
Yes,
Oh yes, we're done. Welcome. I'm really moved by the films. They were so beautiful and informative. So thank you for sharing and holding this space for me to learn and unlearn. I'd like to know, how do you remain resilient as Black men, non-binary masculine, in a world that feels like it's against us? What tips for surviving can you share? Only if you'd like to. Lastly, what can I do as a Black feminist African lesbian do in a non-performative way to be a better accomplice? Not a crime, Phil. Anyway, also just want to send you all so much love. We send love back to you, Phil. We love you so much. So who wants to take on Phil's questions?
Yeah, should I go first?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of like the second question, I feel like just loving like Black trans masculine people. Like I feel like sometimes there's like a lack of love, and especially because of how the world, like how masculinity is seen a lot of the time, and like I spoke about in my film, like how like those fears of masculinity are just like projected onto all men as a way of like being like keeping yourself safe, and like recognizing the ways that I like didn't show like love and respect, etc., to masculinity like prior to my transition and stuff. And I feel like cis people in general, like cis people who want to be allies, recognizing and understanding like the softness and the care and the like all the soft things that trans masculine people like need and deserve within community, and like just like the only way I can describe it as like a hug. You feel me?
I guess one thing I will say, because it's obviously a huge conversation about how to be, the allyship and the understanding. One thing I wish would happen, and this might be too, idealistic, because who knows, is to recognize that specifically Black trans men, but trans people in general, but Black trans men, some of us look very cis, and so I just wish, I guess, that there was more respect and understanding there, because my experience sometimes when I go out, and I used to go to queer spaces, I don't anymore, and one of the reasons why I do sometimes, but I don't actively do it as much, is because I felt super judged sometimes being there, and that if I talked to somebody, there was a lot of, there's a lot of anger towards men in general, and so I wish that there was just more understanding that you don't know who's trans. You just don't know. And so as much as we have these negative thoughts around men and masculine presentation, knowing that I'm trans should not be the reason that you respect me. And that is what I'm up against a lot of the time, is I have to out myself to you. This is in queer spaces in order to feel like one of you. And I wish that that wasn't as like that didn't have to happen as much. So I guess one thing we can all do, and I even try to do, is just understand that people look all different ways, and that I don't necessarily, if I'm in a queer space, I don't know who's straight, I don't know who's trans, I don't know how they identify. Also, you can be straight and trans, but like, I don't know. So I just wish, I think all of us as queer people need to recognize that more, because there is a mourning that we go through, or at least I did. There's a grieving process. Like, I can't look at two women holding hands anymore. They look at me like, why is this guy looking at us? Even though I used to be able to do that, and I used to be seen as someone who was a part of a community, and I lost a lot of that, and it was hard.
I feel you in that one, Lucah, because I'm also tall, and being even when I was a stud, I was seen as a threat anyway, because I think the blackness in itself is a threat. And also, just to add to what you're saying, in a lot of queer spaces, and sometimes around Pride, I'm seen as a threat.
Exactly.
I'm not seen as the person who is them. That's a very that's a very scary thing, and I'm assumed to be the homophobic one, the homophobic threat that's going to beat people up, and I'm just like, no, honey, no, honey. What? I know. Yeah, what? And then, do I have to do that?
Yes, yes, you do.
Yeah, yes, queen. So everything you say, makes sense, and humans are tribal, I suppose, and they're outsiders, and as you say, it's a huge conversation. It's a huge conversation, but I think it's intersected with race as well a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's not just being trans; it's being Black, trans, and masculine presenting, and the threat that brings to it.
Absolutely.
And Phil asked, how do we remain resilient in the world?
For me, that would be keeping the people that understand me close in my life, and like recognizing who has no desire to see me or who fetishizes my masculinity and wants me to present and project a certain image in order for them to like be with me or be around me, and like people that want to put me in a box in it. And just the resilience comes through like deep and profound like friendship and connection with people that are here to see me in my fullness.
Thank you. And Luca?
Yeah, I guess to quickly add on that, because I agree with everything you said. I guess mine comes from really rebalancing, I guess, my center. I don't know if this is a trans thing or not, but I felt like very non-powerful growing up, very hopeless, very, and especially going through a lot of body stuff and just, and self-harm and anger. And so a lot of my resilience to me comes from developing more of a core, a stronger core within myself that says I'm supported and I'm here and I'm loved, and that like I don't need the validation so much from others in my life, that I can develop a lot of that for myself. And over the years, that's really been helpful.
Thank you. And there's one last question. It's from Nikki. Nikki, I'm going to ask one of your questions, and because this is a film-specific question now, we haven't really touched on the specificity of the films. And so the question is, what was your process? First, Nikki said, thank you all so much for your beautiful films and this nuanced conversation. So Nikki, you asked if you have time for 2 questions. We only have time for 1, sorry, because we've actually run out of time, but I'm slipping you under, okay? What was the process of finding trans GNC, gender non-conforming participants for your films? Were they all people you already knew from your communities, or did you reach out in other ways?
Yeah, I'll go. So it was really challenging to find people to be in the film. When it was made 5 years ago, like I found a lot of Black trans people didn't want to come out. Everyone was really afraid of what their families would say or what their friends would say. So I asked a bunch of people. People were saying no, 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 no. I was in a group of Black trans men on Facebook at the time, and I wrote basically a plea, like on a PDF that said, I'm making this film. This is why I think you should be in it. I think it'll be really powerful, and I get that you're scared, but like we need participants, and I bet the world's gonna change, and it's gonna be really great. And it's just, that's basically what I said, and people responded, and we picked them just to kind of show the juxtaposition within the U.S. But other than that, yeah, I didn't know them before, and I developed some great relationships.
I mean, I saw that film in Flair, and I've loved it from the minute, the first frame. I was like, oh my God, because we hardly ever see Black trans men in films, and I'm so grateful you made that film. So thank you so very much. And Melz, thank you. How did it come about, you making this film? Because you didn't direct it, you're in it, but I'm sure there was some kind of collaboration. So can you explain a bit more? You are your friend.
I am my friend, so I woke up and I spoke to my son. Not joking. So yeah, I was the obviously protagonist in my film, and it just kind of came from like I'd made like a few different films with this particular person prior that were like music videos, and like she used to play around with stuff at university. And so as I was going through this transition process, like I just felt there was like just free of my throat chakra in it with the feelings that I was feeling, but I wasn't really hearing anyone in the UK like voice these feelings in a public platform. So we got together, wrote up a kind of storyboard thing, and then just hit the streets and done it.
And it's a beautiful, amazing film. So thank you very much for sharing, some intimate stuff around your process, because I also found it very moving. And to answer desire, that came from a lot of the people in the film I knew. They were friends of mine who I really wrenched their arms to be in it, because not the film is not just about trans men. It's about masculine presented people who've been assigned female at birth, and the spectrums around it. And as we know, a lot of times when people are masc presenting, if they particularly identify as butch, there's a wanting to cut off being looked at. They do the looking, but not the looking the looking on. So it was a journey in convincing people, you know, a bit like Lucah, to get people to be in it, even though they are my friends. And I was very grateful that they came, because they added to the texture of the different films. And very often I use people that I know in my own independent work, because I want to create a queer archive through work, so people can look back and see, actually, these people did exist. You know, it's not our imagination, because very often as queer people, we seem to have amnesia about history. Like, we can only remember like 3 years ago, and the rest is like in the mists of time. Whereas cisgender white men can tell you centuries ago, but you know, we're like, nah, this didn't happen like, you know, 10 years ago. And so I think it's quite important to create queer archive through my work. So I hope that answers your question, Nikki. Well, we've come to the end of this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. We've literally run over so much, and I know, Melz, you had to dash. You're probably thinking, what time is it? Thank you so much, and thank you, Lucah, for participating and, you know, being with us from Canada. Thank you, Aidan, who was working in the background, and also Alex, who worked in the background on the technology, because they were feeding us stuff, letting us in and out, letting you into the rooms. So, and thanks Trans Creative for creating this space in the Trans Social Club. Melz, I don't know what's happening to your internet, but it's like you've frozen. So I will say goodbye. Thanks, Lucah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, if you can hear me after this.
I can hear you. I can hear you. You're back. You froze. I hope you heard everything.
I did.
So thank you so much for participating, being vulnerable and sharing things. It's so important to have these conversations. I hope there are many more. And
Thank you.
Thank you all,
right,
for
take care.
attending.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.